I'll offer you a deal to do 13 years, and I will drop all pending charges on your wife, and I'll return your son to her. And you got 15 minutes to make a decision.
What was your thoughts on that?
Well, as I'm trying to process it, then he comes up and he says, you realize, he goes, if you don't do this, how are you ever going to be able to tell your son that you had a chance to save his mother's life and you allowed her to be put to death? Then he comes back and he goes, oh, now you got 10 minutes. And then he comes back and he says, who do you think could do time better in prison? You, the big bad biker, ex-military, or your wife who just is a part-time work cashier in a mini mart? No, by the way, you got 5 minutes. And you'd run through gunfire for men you don't know. What would you do for your wife that you supposedly love? Well, you got 90 seconds. And in 90 seconds, I walk out of this room and there's no deal. And I look at my attorney and she's going. And I look at my wife's attorney and he says, best deal we're going to get. So I said, yeah, I'll take that deal.
Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by Jamie Morgan Kane, who served in the Vietnam War. He would eventually land himself in prison for 34 years for a murder. Jamie states in today's interview that he did not commit this murder. He recently did get out of prison though, and wrote a few books about his life story. Jamie has done a number of podcasts and has a lot of interest around his life story. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into Jamie's story. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today, I got a new guest on today. Jamie has been around he's done so many different podcasts and he's been doing his thing. He's got a couple books and he's got a really unique story and he's very good at speaking and telling stories. He's just really lived a unique life and he's still around and lucky enough to be telling his story. And Jamie, I'm very happy you came on to my story or my podcast today. And thank you, man. I really appreciate you taking out the time.
I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to kind of go back to maybe your early life because your whole thing with prison was a little different. Like the way that you got to prison and everything, it wasn't like like for you before you even went to prison, there was a story in itself. Like you went to the army and you went to the Vietnam and all this stuff. So I think we should get into a little bit of that, and then we can go into you going to prison and San Quentin and how you help people out while you were in prison and eventually getting out and what led up to prison and stuff. So, but maybe you take us back to what your early life was like because it was kind of hectic.
Well, the very, very basic part is I was born in the Isle of Man, which is a little island, sits off the coast of England. It's nearly halfway between England and Ireland in the Irish Sea. And I was born there. I was born in an area called Onken. And the thing was that my parents, my dad had been in World War II, and he had been a flight sergeant with the RAF. And though he never actually saw combat, he was in Birmingham when the Blitz of Birmingham came in, when they just leveled the city. And one of the big things there was that's where Birmingham Small Arms, BSA, manufactured weapons. And so that was one of the things they were blowing up was all the weapon factories and stuff. And because my dad was involved with rescuing people out of the buildings and stuff, including children, which really affected him later, because some of the children were not alive. But my mother and her mom before both had worked for BSA. Her mom worked in World War I as a munitions worker, and my mom was working in World War II as munitions workers. So the war took a toll on people. Well, when my mom and my dad got married, I know in America it doesn't seem that of a concern, but my dad was Roman Catholic, my mother was Church of England, Protestant, and when she married my dad, her family scratched her out of the family Bible. Her name wasn't to be spoken again. That was it, because she married a papist, and so that caused a lot of the early issue. Then the problem was my dad started having problems with what is now known as PTSD, but back then they referred to it as, quote, shell shocked. And the funny thing was, in World War II, the mindset was if you weren't able to deal with the horrors of war, then you were a coward. And so a lot of people hid that. Their families hid it. They would send them off to the country, type thing, to retreats and stuff to hide out the thing. So anyway, my dad ended up having some very severe things. My parents got married in '46, and when my mom was 8 months pregnant with me, my dad, having gone through more than a year of really bad issues, filed for divorce on my mom a month before I was born, and then left the aisle. Well, my parents worked at a hotel that my grandparents owned, my dad's parents owned on the aisle, and the thing was that the moment that happened, my grandmother threw my mom out of her house, her home at the hotel, out of her job. My mom had no family to go back to in Birmingham because of the fact she married a Roman Catholic. So my mom ended up going to a little area in Onken where they had these little hovels where elderly women who had no family, the government would give them a stipend and they stayed there and stuff. And these women were women that my mom used to make little food packets for and give to them to help them out. And so she had friends there. They took us in. I ended up being home birthed there, and my birth never got registered. Uh, a week after I was born, I was taken to my grandparents' parish, St. Anthony's, and I was baptized. And initially, I was supposed to be named James Edward Kane, uh, but my grandmother wouldn't let me have the Edward. My dad was Douglas Edward Kane, and my grandmother wouldn't have it. So what ended up happening was they were having an argument over even if they were going to baptize me, which of course in the tradition, if you weren't baptized within a week of your birth, you were going to be a soulless child, and Satan would take you and all that kind of stuff. Um, so there was happened to be a Welsh woman sitting in the congregation thing there. She spoke up. She said, "The only thing you guys agree on is he's of this isle. Why don't you call him Morgan?" Says Morgan means sea dweller or island man in Welsh, uh, for a boy, and if it's a female, it means enchantress, based on Morgan Le Fay, King Arthur's half sister. So I ended up becoming Morgan James Kane. But my mom was going through basically a postpartum depression. So my mom wasn't caring for me, feeding me, all this stuff. And my grandmother had sent a girl that worked at her hotel, this Irish girl who was part of the Irish traveler family called the Boswells, who had been coming to the Isle of Man since like the 1840s. They would have big gypsy traveler fairs and horse things and all that stuff. And she worked for my grandmother, was trained in silver service, which is the hotelier domestic training. And so she started taking my care. She would bathe me and care for me. And because my mother wouldn't breastfeed me, she would bring me goat's milk. And I was weaned on goat's milk. Well, about somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks after I was born, my mother just left me on grandma's doorstep one day, and my mother left the isle never to return. My
Damn.
father had left and he went down towards London. My mother left and she stayed up in the area of Cheshire. Um, so suddenly grandma's got me. The problem is my grandparents were not from the Isle. One was from Birmingham, one was from Liverpool. So they were what they call come-overs. And though my grandparents were, when they passed away in '81, they were the longest married couple in the Isle. They got married in 1911 in the Isle and
Wow.
died in '81. They were 53 days shy of their 70th wedding anniversary. Granddad died 1 week, and the day that they took granddad and did the burial ceremony, grandma came home, laid down, never woke up. And
Damn.
and they broke on her death. They actually wrote "broken heart" for her
Yeah.
cause of death. And and they were quite philanthropists on the Isle. My grandmother was very big into getting the finance for the second Manx Spitfire for the war effort. She got the first old sailors' home built, um, for retiring sailors. Granddad had been what they called the first primate of the ROAB, which is like kind of like a Masonic type lodge. Even first primate was like the highest ranking guy. This was like in '29, and then and he was a World War I veteran himself, and then they still give out the Leo Kane Trophy for the Horticultural Society in Onken. They still give out the Kane Trophy now at King Edward's Golf Course, but originally it was at my grandparents' golf links that they had. Um, and the thing was that because they were so well known, the funny thing about the Isle, there was only 50,000 people living in the Isle when I was born. It's about 80,000 now, and rumors would spread. And if you were not of the Isle, people love to tell the rumors about you. So Grandma,
True.
being this philanthropist person, um, including the fact during World War II, she ran the largest black market on the Isle, where she would sell to those who could pay, so she could help out those who couldn't pay. So she had like a lot of people were very near and dear to Grandma. But the thing was that my dad had done a civil divorce rather than a church divorce, so it was public knowledge. It was in the paper, all that, and Grandma didn't like that. Well, in 1950, the British had passed a law saying no British child, and I have British citizenship because the Isle of Man, all the people there are British citizens, even though we are Manx nationals. Um, and they passed a law saying that no British child could be sent away from the UK without the government's approval. Well, Grandma got around with that because she went to the Catholic priest, told him, "Look, I want to send him away so he doesn't become a rumor for the rest of our lives." So they arranged that Irish children coming from the Republic who were being sent away, coming into Liverpool. I got sent over to Liverpool, put in with this group of Irish children, and Martha, the woman who took care of me, the Irish gal, was given me as a caretaker, and she went with me. And so the arrangements was they sent me to a place in Ottawa, Canada, called St. Joseph's Orphan Asylum. It was ran by uh, nuns of the Gray Nuns of the Cross. So you get that warm, fuzzy feeling about the place, right from the gate.
Yeah.
And this was one of the places that was a part of what's known as the Duplius orphan scandal. Duplius was the prime minister, and he had made arrangements with different church groups that they could sell abundant, if children could be adopted normally, but if they have an abundance of children, they could sell some to be indentured servants to Canadian farmers. And the idea was that when the child turned 18, the farmers would notify the government, the child would be given Canadian citizenship, and everybody goes on happily on their lives. Problem happened, thousands of them did not. The families, all they were required to do is feed, house, and clothe them, not educate them, not have them getting married and moving on and stuff. So there were actually, quite a few, into the thousands, of these children who were just passed down with the farm equipment and the animals to the next generations and stuff like that. And so they suddenly are in their 60s and 70s, never had families of their own, and now people are starting to find out about it. This was also where the Grey Nuns had ran mental hospitals both in Canada and America, and they would also send over abundance children into the mental hospitals. If you take a perfectly normal child at 3, 4, or 5 and put him for 40 years in a mental hospital, they'll either die or they'll adapt, which means they'll pick up the tics and the mannerism stuff of the people in the hospital with them. And so you did that to these kids. Well, Martha saw this was pretty much my future. And so when I was about a year old, 'cause I went there when I was 6 months old, she stole me. And my mother had given her passport um, to give to me when I turned older if I wanted to find my way back. Well, back then, passports, you didn't have to, everything wasn't scanned in, and so you could take a picture out and put a new picture in. Nobody was wiser, basically. So Martha changed the picture in the passport, took over using my mother's name, Moya Iris Kane, and then smuggled me into America. To the best of my knowledge, from what I've been told, is that we went down through the eastern seaboard, uh, through Irish communities all the way down, and then across the southern part of the states. We eventually ended up in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the people in Phoenix, Arizona, we ended up with was at a trailer park. Was a lady that I knew as Grandma Toby, and come to find out, her real name was actually Ruby Benson. But the way she got the name Toby was that she had a really elderly black man with no teeth who used to be her handyman, do all kinds of things for her. And he'd always call her Missy Toby. And he was trying to say Mrs. Ruby, but he'd say
Oh,
Toby. And so everybody just called her Toby, And we found out later that she was actually in a way related to my grandmother because it's believed that she was actually engaged to my grandmother's brother, who was, we believe, killed in World War I, and she never married, but she had pictures of him on the wall in her house. Um, and so she used to care for me a lot because Martha would leave me and she'd go off and do things and then come back and get me. And so there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on. And Martha, like I said, being Irish, she ended up having bad relationship, and she also had a thing for the drink. And she ended up having three daughters uh, through a number of different relationships and marriages. And to my knowledge, she never got divorced. She just got moved on and married again and stuff. But one of the families that she had worked for uh, was Dr. Wetmore and his wife Alice. And in the thing, she used to do parties for them and then, cleanings and stuff. Well, they had adopted a boy and a girl. The boy they adopted was named John Raymond, and the girl was Alice. Was Mary Ann Elizabeth, and so about they'd had the boy about 18 months or 2 years, and something happened, and the boy just had to go away. Is basically the story we understood. Well, Dr. Wetmore was just getting ready to go take a teaching position in Fresno, California, at the California University of Fresno. At that time, it still is California State University, or yeah, California State University, I think. Um, anyway, he was going to be up there in the business department because he had a business administration degree. So anyway, he was going to be dealing with that. Then what ended up happening was that they were expecting him to show up with a wife and two children. He was short one child. So in a roundabout way, he found out that I wasn't Martha's, and she kind of told my background story and stuff. So in a statement he sent to the INS before it turned over to ICE, he basically told the whole story and stuff, and said he'd actually given her money for me, and he told her he would adopt me, and that way she had money to help her with her health issues and stuff. But he never adopted me; he just gave me the other child's identity, including his date of birth, social security number, name, and all that stuff. Now I was really
So
small for my age at the
what
time.
happened to the other kid? Did he just die or did they kill him?
Well, we don't know, but the thing was, even the FBI and ICE could never find him. But
Gee.
they went on the assumption if he didn't have his identity, he probably wasn't going to be needing his identity.
Mhm. So that's
And
what they went, and then you ended up getting it, didn't you?
I was given the identity, told I was adopted, um, and people I knew about adoption said, "Oh yeah, they one of the things they do when you adopt you, they give you a new name." Yeah. But by the time they did it, I was actually 14, but they backdated me to 12 to his age because of my size. And I could fit in his clothes, though funny enough, he was actually bigger and so his clothes were a bit loose. Um, but I'd never gone to school up to this point. I'd always been homeschooled by Grandma Toby. And so when I finally went to my first school in Fresno, I had his school records going with me, but I was actually further advanced in my knowledge of stuff than what the kids were because I had one-on-one teaching by a lady who taught me my math and geography and history and writing and all this stuff. So anyway, so we went through that and we got into I got into school and I got bumped up a couple of grades because of how well I was advanced. And but Dr. Wetmore and I never quite meshed. We were always kind of bumping heads because and he one of the things he did when I first got there was he took a bunch of items that I'd been given by Grandma Toby, saying, "No, you're not responsible enough for have these and blah blah blah." And one was a gold watch, and one was a painting and that she had done and things like that. But I never got any of that back, by the way. But um, so
Did
moving
you ever
along,
get was it like an abusive family then and stuff too
yeah, it
then
was
or
abuse. Yeah, well, that's why some people think that he may have beat the other child to the point where the child couldn't recover. Because
yeah.
he would have to go out and hold a tree in the back garden and use a razor strap on me and beat me across back of the legs and the back and stuff like that. And he did that a number of times when I would displease him and stuff. And it would be little things sometimes, like at dinner, if you didn't cut your buttered bread in half, he was known to pick up my whole dinner plate, dump it on my head, and tell me
What
to
the
go to my room. You know,
fuck, man?
it was
Just
one of these types.
insane.
Yeah,
That's
so it was one of these
insane,
things.
man.
Well,
Yeah.
but you got to kind of understand where he came from. His name was Charles Henry Wetmore, but he went by Terry. And the reason he went by Terry was that when he grew up in New York, he had a skin disease, like an eczema type thing. And the treatment for that back in the day was you'd strap the child down the table and you'd paint hot wax on them to try to encourage skin to grow, right? And he came from a real well-to-do family. And one of the things they did in the family was his father taught that all children had to be punished for things that they did wrong, but you never beat children of good breeding. So they actually brought in a whipping boy. A poor child would come in, take their beating for them, and get paid for the beating. But they had to stand there and watch what he was doing, saying, "This is what happens because you caused this."
What the fuck?
Yeah, and the
That's
thing was,
nuts.
yeah. So I mean, this is the kind of the family he grew up in. It's like the only ice cream allowed in the house was vanilla, because that's when God created first.
Jeepers, man.
And
Yeah.
so I mean, so he had kind of a warped sense of being himself. But
Mhm.
anyway, so it came to the point where I had gotten up to where I was going to actually be graduating. You know, uh, when it would appear that I was actually 16 and roughly 16 and a half. And the thing was that uh, he had been working to get me an appointment into the Air Force Academy because of my grades and all this stuff. And I had been doing some junior college classes on the weekends at night from high school, because you were allowed to do that back in those days. And so I had quite a little bit of thing going on for me. Well, when I found out he wanted me to go in the Air Force because that's what he had been, and I had friends who were going into the Marines, and at the time I was, like I said, I wasn't that tall, I wasn't that big. I had big legs because I'd ran cross country. It was my sports that I was into, was running cross country. So I had good sized legs, but not I was not very big on the top at that time. So I didn't think I could make it with the Marines. But then I also didn't feel like I wanted to go somewhere and kill people. So decided to go in the Navy, which I thought was just the opposite of the Air Force. One's on the sea, one's in the sky. And then I decided to go as a corpsman, uh, which is in the medical corps. And I thought, well, I'd get there and I'd end up being around my Marines if I attached myself to them. And I would maybe be with some of my friends from school, and I'd be able to help them. That never happened. I never served with any of the people I knew. Because one funny thing is, when you go through boot camp and everybody goes different ways, the likelihood of you run up to with a half a dozen people you went in with is really unlikely.
Yeah.
Um, then anyway, so anyway, so that's what happened. Was when they were doing the recruiting, I convinced the school counselor that they had actually made a pencil mistake on my age, and that instead of being born in 56, I was actually born in 54, which is the correct year I was born, because I was actually born the 21st of February 1954. What they had down was 27th of February 1956, which was the other boy's actual birth date. So um, at that time, I didn't know I was actually born on the 21st, because Martha had always celebrated my birthday on the 27th, because that was actually the day I was baptized. And in her
Oh,
mind, being a Catholic, that when you're baptized, that's like a rebirthing type
yeah.
thing. So I didn't know for many, many years that I was actually born on the 21st. So, so the counselor took me down. I ended up joining the Navy. They just corrected the administrative error, and that caused all kinds of problems. Dr. Wetmore was just livid, but he couldn't report it because he couldn't have people investigating. So And anyway, so I went into the Navy and went through my training boot camp in San Diego, and went to Balboa Hospital for my basic Corps school training. Went to Camp Pendleton for my fleet, my field medical service school training, and got attached to the FMF. Again, got attached to the Marine units and stuff. So uh, initially, I was with grunt units and stuff, and for a long time, I was just attached to units where guys were so bored they would put their arms together and drop a lit cigar, you know, on their arm to see who could stand the heat longer, or tape down scorpions and arm wrestle over them. You know, and
They
then
were that
so
bored.
I was treating cigar burns and scorpion stings and things like that.
Not
Uh,
much action going on there.
yeah, and stuff. But eventually, like I said, then I got with my active Marine unit stuff. But Dr. Wetmore actually made the comment that he had uh, pulled strings because he was a colonel in the Air Force Reserve. But he had a lot of politicians, friends, and like I said, his best friend, one of his best friends, was a guy named Richard Nixon. You know, and he used to go visit Richard Nixon at San Clemente and back at the White House stuff. And they
The
grew up
Richard Nixon. Richard
the Richard
Nixon?
Nixon, yeah. And
Really?
one of the people who used to come to the house on a regular basis to see Dr. Wetmore and sometimes take him places was a guy named G. Gordon Liddy.
I'm not familiar with that one. Who is that one?
He was one of the Watergate plumbers.
Oh,
When
okay.
the guys who put the all the stuff into the Watergate Hotel to bug the Democratic Convention and stuff.
Damn,
He was
man.
the only one. He was the only one of them that didn't give up the president and get a light sentence. He did the most time, and funny enough, when he got out and everything, he actually appeared basically as himself in Miami Vice episodes, and he was also involved in starting up, being involved in the private security consultant industries and stuff. I'm not exactly sure which one. I've heard people say it was Blackwater, but it could have been a number of them, but because they were. But he was involved in that. But he played himself, basically in Miami Vices, and a pretty tough guy and stuff. But he used to come over and see Wetmore and take him to places and stuff. And Dr. Wetmore, during the war, he'd flown 3 missions as a navigator bombardier on a B-17s out of England, and then he moved on to become uh, an analyst with the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Before they were
and,
around?
yeah. Before the CIA came, the OSS that became the Office of Strategic Studies, I think it's or services, but
Damn.
it's what he became from there. But when he was at the university, he was, like I said, a college professor doing business administration. Yet he never wrote papers to be published, never wrote books to be published, and it had been kind of insinuated that he actually was doing recruitment for the government for certain agencies and stuff. And so, and he did have this thing where he used to keep, like, you know, information on people that he could use later to his own benefit. So anyway, he'd said he wrote like I think it was like about a 14-page affidavit that he'd sent to INS while I was in prison to basically tell on me and say they need to get rid of me and stuff. But he didn't have it sent till after he was dead as part of his probate because he was concerned that things in it might get him charged.
No
Because he
doubt.
did give
Yeah.
up a lot. So he had kept it. So it went in right after he uh, the fall, like 6 months after he died, they did the probate, and it was sent in by the court to INS. But he'd supplied like 70 supportive documents and all this stuff, including letters from my grandmother and you know like birth certificates of some of my family, other things. So anyway, but he said in that document that he actually had used some of his political strings to get me sent overseas. Um, and in a way, I don't know if he meant to see if he could get me killed or what, because his thing was he took great pride in the fact that it was his tutelage and stuff that made me into the person who I became and stuff. But yeah, so I caught the very end of the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's what we should get into next. So what year was this when you went out there then?
late '74, came back
Okay.
a month before the fall of Saigon. So
So
just so you know, it
when
wasn't like
so
say what pardon?
I was gonna say, so when you went out there then what was this like when you were getting in just like when you were approached to go in? How was this approach like, okay, hey, you're gonna go there now, Jamie?
Well, basically, I had put in for active combat unit with the Fleet Marine Force and stuff, just to get away from being with the grunts doing you know first aid. And so I was told I would probably never be sent because of the fact that everything was winding down. And the thing was that though they weren't sending combat troops in, and the majority of the combat troops had been pulled out in '73, they were still sending certain units and stuff in to help with the evacuation of uh, those Vietnamese, Southern Vietnamese, and the Hmong and stuff like that, the hill people who had been helping the U.S. in their campaigns, because otherwise they were going to be killed by the communists, North Vietnamese and VCs and stuff. So I was there, and it was basically we were just doing the evacuations and trying to go. We had to go in, find these people, and then get them out, get them on helicopters, and get them out. It didn't mean that we didn't come under fire because we did on a number of occasions and stuff. And I did treat people who had gotten wounded and
What
some
was
that
the
who died.
first one what was the first one like for you? Like when you went your first evacuation or that was like
Well,
that stood out or maybe even the first one?
their very first was when we first got dropped off. We were told that there was no hostile activity in the area, but it turned out that the intel was more than 24 hours old. And
Uh,
basically, they tell you any intel that's more than about 8 hours old is useless because things could change. And so we ended up basically coming right into a middle of uh, southward coming troops. And so it was a lot of bullets hitting the trees and the bushes and the grass, and us trying to get the hell out of there to a safer spot while returning fire and stuff. Um, in the very first engagement, I was lucky. I didn't really have any real injuries to deal with, except for a couple of minor grazings and stuff. But I did have later on one of the next ones. I had a guy who got shot in the shoulder. He's a big guy, got shot in the shoulder. The bullet went through and through, and it hit nothing vital, no bones. It just went through the muscle and stuff. And he had convinced himself he was going to die. And I
really?
kept telling him, "You're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine." And by the time we got him on the medevac and we sent him out, by the time we got back to base, I'd found out he died.
Really?
He'd convinced himself he was going to die, and basically his body allowed that. But
Wow. Power of
it
words,
was like
man.
just but roughly about a month and a half or so later, we had a guy who had a mine jump up on him, and it blasted off and it took off both of his legs just below the knee. And I got to him and I got him, pressure bandages on him, got him done up, got him pulled away, got him over to the medevac, and he looked at me and he said, "Doc, I know I'm going to be okay because I can feel my toes." And there's no toes. And it was about 7, 8 months after I was back that I happened to go to Balboa Hospital, walk into the physiotherapy room. And he was in uh, uh, the whirlpool tank, and I was with a tour of people coming through, and he grabbed the trapeze bar above him, lifted himself up, and showed his stumps and yelled, "Help! Help! There's a shark in here!" And then he realized later that I was the corpsman who'd patched him up, put him on the bird,
Wow,
and
man.
got with me. He got contacted me, and his wife and daughter contacted me, and they told me how grateful they were that I'd been there for him. But he was so sure he was going to be okay, and he made it. Yes, he didn't have legs, but he ended up getting prosthetics. You know, that he had a little girl that loved her daddy to no end, and a wife that was there for him, and so that's why I say that's more what being the corpsman was to me, was doing things that where I could help people and stuff. And like I said, I did have to run through gunfire on a number of occasions to pick up wounded Marines. And at that time, I'd also have to return gunfire trying to protect my Marine while I was trying to get him to safety.
That's what I was
So,
gonna ask. Yeah, like, how was that like? Because you didn't really wanna be from what it sounded like, you didn't really wanna go to battle at all in the first place when you were first enrolling, and then now you're out
yeah,
here
I
in the
did.
field.
But the thing with me, see, to me, that my job as a corpsman was that my job was to try to bring these men home. These, and I used to always get people mad at me because I'd say they're my Marines, and I have a lieutenant or captain go, no, no, there are my Marines. So no, you're not the one out there trying to bring them home. You're the one sending them out into harm's way.
Right.
So and things like that. But for me, yeah, it was all about the fact that I took it as like a sacred duty. This is what I wanted to do, and funny enough is that, quite honestly, I've told people time and time again, because of a lot of things I did in my life, that the only true fear I've ever had in my life, only thing I can say that I've ever been afraid of, was getting so old I couldn't take care of myself and having to be a burden to other people. That was it. I mean, I did amateur bull riding. I rode motorcycles. I mountain climbed. I got in barroom fights.
Went to
I ran through
prison?
gunfire. So for me, you know, the idea was I always put the value of other people ahead of me. I always thought other people were more valuable because I didn't, like I said, I didn't have family. And so it wasn't like somebody was waiting for me to come home, even though I had gotten married. So my wife was out with as many guys as she could be with when I wasn't around, and blame me for the fact I wasn't around. You know, but and so the thing I wanted most was a family, and that's the one thing I've been denied even up to today. I still have no family, and that even though I have family members over here, uh, basically the thing was is that they were glad I got back. They wished me well, but as they told me, I've been a stranger all their lives, and they had no room in their lives for a stranger. So,
Fuck.
kind of a
Yeah.
little different from the long lost family shows you see, where everybody's happy to find somebody that they didn't know they had.
Oh
So
gosh.
so for me, my thing was I felt I was at my best when I was helping someone else get back to their family, you know,
Well, and
and
I
stuff.
well, that's what you did with that role as a medic, and so, I mean, that was pretty fitting for you, and what while you were a medic, like, how long were you out there then? Because you were there for quite a bit, and you've seen a lot of action. I mean, what
Well,
were some other
we went
situations?
we went we went over in October, uh, in October of '74, and I came back in March of '75. So you're talking roughly about 5 months, 5.5 months. You know,
Yeah.
um, well, like I said, uh, a lot, like I said, there were a lot of it, believe it or not, was just humping through a lot of jungle and stuff. And I treated a lot of injuries that were not combat related, but people that stepped on things, and uh, you know, there's, like they say, 1,000 ways that the jungle will try to kill you, and stuff. But no, I took care of a number of amputations. I took care of bullet wounds, shrapnel wounds, burns. Uh, there were a couple times fuel tanks had blown up on things and people were burned, and I'd have to do everything I could to try to make him as comfortable as possible before you get him out of there. Um, I had gotten a little bit taller and I got thicker as I was in the military, working out and stuff. And so there were times when I actually carried bodies more than a mile to evac them and stuff. But at no time was I saw it as a burden. At no time did I see it as anything but uh, basically an honor to be of service to them and doing my very best. And it was always the thing. Though the few that I lost, I always questioned myself: did I do enough? Was I there fast enough? Was there something I missed? Did I not have all the knowledge I needed? You know, uh,
Um,
so it's one of those type of things. And
yeah.
and of course, what ended up happening, of course, when Vietnam was ending, the U.S. government decided to go to quote a peacetime military. So
Hmm.
they suddenly guys who were career men who were looking to do their 20 odd years or more were suddenly given pink slips and told they weren't needed anymore, and so they weren't going to get their full pensions and things like that. And of course, like I said, a lot of people uh, didn't like the Vietnam conflict, and so if you had any involvement with it, uh, there were people that didn't want to hire you, people didn't want to rent to you when you got out. Um, you know, friends that you had before you went in didn't want to know you because they didn't go in, and they suddenly were on the other side, and it became a real turmoil, which is what caused it. And but I ended up being diagnosed with severe PTSD because of my job and stuff, and that was one of the things I had been um, um, diagnosed, and then I had been awarded 70% disability to receive uh, uh, disability payments. The problem with me on that was that I didn't have the wounds that you could see. And so even though I was struggling a bit with some PTSD issues, uh, not sleeping well, nightmares, things along that line, um, I I wouldn't accept any money. So no, I'm good. I'm good. So I wouldn't. Well, I wasn't accepting the money at the time. Uh, and it's kind of a funny thing about how that money just kind of sat there and continued building up while you're waiting. But what got me initially to get my diagnosis was um, that Halloween of 1977. My I had the first child, the first boy that I thought was mine. Was born October of '76. Well, in June of '77, my wife walked out on us and said she was tired of being a mom, tired of being a wife. She wanted to go home to her mom and be a daughter, you know. And so she left me with him. And so I was being a single father, and I was caring for my son while I was trying to get my motorcycle business going out of a garage. Uh, and then what ended up happening was I got invited by some friends to go to uh, a haunted house put on by a Christian group, right? And so we made arrangements for all the kids to be kept at one person's mother's house and stuff. And we all went. Well, I was the only one that didn't have a couple. I wasn't a couple. And because of my attitude about I don't really care, I'm not really afraid of things. And I'm one of these people that uh, I know that like zombies and Frankenstein and werewolves and all that stuff don't exist. So I'm certainly
Right.
not afraid. I'm not certainly not afraid of anything that doesn't exist. So we went through it, and I was in the very front. I was the very first guy, and people are holding on to my shirt and stuff as they're falling, and things are jumping out, scaring them. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, all right. But we went through this plastic curtain that was coming down. We went into this room, and there were strobe lights going off. And off to my left, there were a couple of guys dressed up as U.S. Marines. And over across on my right, there were some guys dressed up as Viet Cong with machine gun, and they were shooting off the machine gun. You could see the bursts of light coming out of it. You could hear the ta 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 ta. Ta. and I could see the Marines jumping and with blood squirting out of stuff. I don't know what happened after that. All I know is what people told me. They said that I shoved everybody back. I jumped over the rail and I attacked the two guys on the machine gun nest. And one, the guy said he saw me reach for my chest. Well, that's where we used to carry our K-bar fighting knife. And of course, I didn't have one, but they said that I was just beating these guys. And of course, they're not Viet Cong. They're just guys dressed up to play this little part. So the last thing
No.
they need is some guy who's out of his mind stomping on them and stuff. And even two wounded Marines apparently ran over, tried to pull me off. My friends were pulling me off. And the only thing I remember was being outside and having people holding me and having San Diego sheriffs pull up. And they, everybody's in this thing about I attacked these guys. And this one sergeant walked up and he had the globe and anchor on his arm, the Marine Corps symbol. And one of the guys with me had told him, look, he was a corpsman with you guys, and he was over there, and this, and then told him this is what was going on, this is what triggered it off, and the sergeant went, excuse me, and he asked the church people. They said, well, yeah, because this is a haunted house, it's a house of horrors, and we thought the horror of war. So they didn't think anything wrong with that, you know. I mean, they had, people butchering people with chainsaws and creatures jumping out. And so they thought this was just another little thing. And that sergeant said, hang on, I got this. And he tells me, Doc, I think we need to take you to the hospital instead of the jail. And so they did. They took me to the VA hospital in San Diego. And I was in there for 2 weeks. And my friends actually took care of my son at the time, or the boy I thought was my son. And while I was in there, the doctors kept trying to explain to me that it wasn't real. And I kept explaining to them it was real. So we had this kind of impasse of, you know, uh, we'll agree to disagree type thing. And nobody pressed charges and everything. So I was released and stuff. And then it wasn't too long after that I had moved back up to Fresno. And they basically contacted and said, look, you need to come to a clinic and stuff. So I got told to come to this veterans clinic at the VA hospital. So I rode up on my Harley, dressed in all my leathers. I went in, got in the elevator, went upstairs, and I went into the room. And this room was used for a lot of activities. And they had like bars, like what you think of like in a dance studio along the walls for, the people put their legs and arms on and stuff. But they were to help people walk and stuff. But they had mirrors all the way around this room. And when I stepped into this room, there was all these men in there in pajamas, in wheelchairs, missing limbs with burns on their faces, missing arms. There were a couple that were on, uh, gurneys because they couldn't sit up, they couldn't stand up. And I had the image. I could see myself in the mirror looking back at me behind these men. And I thought, how terribly disrespectful am I right now? These men have given so much, and I'm standing here with not a mark on me. And I apologized to them and I left. Right. And I got a call from the doctor later, and she goes, "No, no, you don't understand. They would have understood." I said, "No, I couldn't do it." I said, "I didn't deserve to be in that room with those men." And so
What
anyway,
did you end up doing?
well, I had one other incident a little bit later that year. Uh, well, right around July 4th, when everybody just because I can't go to fireworks shows, watch rockets, red glares, and all that shit. Can't do it.
Right. Right.
Uh, but I was walking through a shopping center, a Safeway shopping mall, a shopping parking lot, and somebody lit off a string of firecrackers. And I chased that person probably a good block or so as they were running for their lives because I mean they said that I had a look in my eyes that if I'd caught them, I probably would have really hurt them. And they were just luckily they were a lot faster than I was at that time. But it was another incident that I had that got me referred back to the VA hospital. And like they said, look, you're suffering with all this and stuff. And my wife had notified them that, that I would sometimes jump out of bed. Um, the fact I used to keep my K bar by my bedside because I brought that home with me. I used to wear it on my hip when I was out riding my motorcycle. I wore a knife strapped down my hip because back in the day, nobody cared about. I mean, everybody I basically knew, all the bikers I knew carried knives on their hips and stuff. Nobody ever said, "Oh, you can't wear that." I mean, I knew a few guys even had swords hanging off their hips, backs and stuff. Nobody thought anything of it. You know, where funny enough over here in the UK, you know, they're worried about knife crime because they ban they banned uh, firearms basically, and
Hmm.
even things like uh, air rifles are heavily restricted over here. You know,
Yeah.
BB guns and pellet guns. And of course in the U.S. you have the National Rifle Association starts kids out there 5, 6 years old with 22s. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Big
So yeah,
difference, man.
so it is. It's all big difference and stuff. So anyway,
Well,
but that was the deal is, but that caused problems with, um, and that was one of the things is that about a year after that is when my wife's family convinced her to file for divorce to take custody of my boy. And the judge, when he ruled against me, because I took on the fact that she had abandoned him and she had neglected him and stuff. And the judge came back and said, if I have a choice between a bad mother and a good father, if the bad mother's neglected and all stuff, but she has lots of family support, and the good father has PTSD, I have to give the child to the bad mother. And so they took the
damn.
child from, and the California law at the time and stuff. And that really was a hard time for me because because I thought he was my son and I'd been raising him for almost 18 months and stuff. Well, just before that happened, Dr. Wetmore called me up and said, "Look, I want you to sign over your parental rights to to me, and I'll raise him. And I'll change his name to a more respectable name, blah blah blah." Because I named him John Henry, and Wetmore was really upset that I gave him a Negro name because we weren't Negro. But
Man.
funny enough, he was born in 76. 76 was what? The bicentennial year. You knew who John Henry was, right? An American folk hero. And
Yeah.
funny enough, I never even thought, oh, he's black. That never came. I thought, steel driving man, strong man, big man.
Right. It's just
So,
different with him.
yeah,
Different.
with him is like you gave him a Negro name,
That's
except
terrible.
he wasn't quite that polite using that particular term. So it did
No.
start with him. You know.
No.
So this was Dr. Wetmore.
Yeah.
But see, there was a time when parents used to teach you about the birds and the bees, right?
Hmm.
And they would tell you about the facts of life.
Right.
Well, Dr. Wetmore's facts of life were real simple. If you get a butler, make sure he's English. If you get a doctor or a banker, make sure they're Jewish. You want to have French maids, you want to have Italian or Spanish cooks, you want to have Asian or Mexican gardeners, and you want to have a black chauffeur because they look so damn good in those uniforms and they'll take care of the car because they know they'll never own one like that.
Jeepers, man.
So,
That's terrible.
so I'm sitting here, I'm listening to him, and I'm like, yeah. Uh,
Okay. Like, yeah,
so,
right. You're like, this
and like I
guy's
said,
nuts.
and I had a friend that I brought to the house one day, and the kid happened to be black, and his dad was a bricklayer. And
Hmm.
Dr. Wetmer pulled me aside and said, "Why is he here?" I said, "Because he's my friend. We don't invite those kind of people to the house."
Jeez, man.
And he goes, "So is his dad on welfare?" I said, "No, his dad's a bricklayer." He goes, "Well, he goes, you got to understand, they're white collar people and blue collar people do not mix." And that time it was that kind of a thing. And to show you just how far he took this, whenever new professors came to work at the university, he would bring them to the house for like an introductory party that Mrs. Wetmore would cater to, and then he would introduce them to the family and other people he'd invited. And I remember this one time when they brought these like 3 or 4 professors in. One was black. He brought them all in, and he said, "And this is Dr. Green, and this is Dr. Brown." That's it. And he got to the black guy and he goes, "And this is Mister." He wouldn't call him doctor. And the reason he said he would call him doctor is because he had to get extra help uh, with his studies. He had to get extra tutoring to help get through his studies. So he hadn't really earned it, even
Gee.
though the guy had a doctorate. And like I said, this is why I say. But anyway, so when he called me up and asked me about about doing this, I told him no. But we had this big argument. He got so mad, he actually went in, came back with this envelope and threw it at me and told me, "You're not my son. You're not even an American. You get here away from here. Don't ever come back again." And in this envelope was my baptism certificate from the Isle of Man, which Martha had always told me growing up that I was from the Isle of Man, and she told me a lot about it. And she gave me a real sense of pride of being Manx. And then there was also my mother's passport in there with Martha's picture in it. But to kind of give you the understanding about Martha with me, is Martha explained to me that right after I got baptized, that she had taken me down the following week to the beachfront right there in Douglas, which is the capital. And she'd put a piece of sand in my mouth, a drop of seawater in my mouth, and held me up into the mist, which is known as Mahannan's cloak, which is the Celtic sea god for whom the Isle of Man is supposedly quoted named for. And she did that to bind me to the isle so the isle would call me home. And then when I was little, she used to always tell me things. She'd go, "Remember, remember, remember." Whenever she said that, whatever she told me after that, that's what I'm supposed to remember. And this was all part of that little gypsy thing that she was a part of. And she told me that I was a man of the isle, a son of the sea, and a brother of the storm. And she told me that, you know, I was born of the isle, that the sea was I was father, my father was the sea, which is basically saying the sea god. And then she said, and no matter what, throughout your life, you're going to find yourself in a lot of confrontational and adversarial situations, but not to worry, because you'll be able to weather them because the storm is your brother and he'll be right there with you. So, and you got to understand, as a little 5, 6 year old kid starting out, and her telling me these stories. I come from a magical, mystical place that sits in the Irish Sea, and there's all these fantastical creatures that live there, the Finadari, the Modi Doo, uh, and stuff like that. Um, it kind of gives you some sense, because I didn't have a father, I didn't have a family, so all I had was these stories she used to tell me, and she told me a lot of like Celtic stories of gods and heroes, and and fantastical things that happen. And as a little kid, you tend to believe more than you would if you were an adult hearing the same stories.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, so I grew up with that idea, and of course, the motto of the Isle of Man is it's 3 legs. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 3 legs. Oops, make it that way. There, 3 legs, and the motto of the isle is wherever we're thrown, we will stand, because one leg is always touching the ground, one foot's on the ground. So again, and then I was brought up with the idea that whoever I meet might never meet another Manxman again. So I have to represent my whole nation. I bear the weight of my nation's on my shoulder, because I have to be the best representative of my people, for better or for worse. So anyway, so that was kind of the thing. And then, like I said, when I left the service, I was still in the healing business because I was a motorcycle mechanic, and I looked towards motorcycle mechanics the way I looked at healing bodies. The framework is your bone structure. Your wheels basically are your feet. The engine is your heart. The carburetions are your lungs. The oil is your blood. The wiring is your nervous system. The headlight is your eye. Your exhaust system is your bum. It's all. So when I worked on a bike, I would work on it the same way I would do when I was trying to diagnose people. What's wrong? Okay, it's got to be this. And so, like I said, and the thing was, I used to tell people, people said I got along better with bikes than I did people. And I said, well, that's the one thing is that if you is that I never had a bike turn on me, cheat on me, tell on me, run away on me, none of that. And if I took care of it, it'd get me home. Uh, so yeah, I did seem to have a better relationship with motorcycles than I did a lot of people.
Well, that's
But
what I was gonna, get into next was like what led up to the whole prison situation because it did have something to do with people.
right, well, the thing was is that, like I said, I ended up getting with another woman after went through the divorce and lost the first child um, to his mom, um, and we had a son. And then, in a mere weird twist of circumstances, I happened to be down in Southern California because I was living in Fresno at the time, and I was at a restaurant, and I just happened to walk in, and I had sunrise on my vest, my bike vest, and that was the nickname I'd gone by when I was a little kid. I've been referred to as Sunrise because I was always watching the sunrise because Martha had always told me my home was, if I looked towards the sunrise, I'd be looking towards home. And so I ended up having this little nickname. And there was this girl, and she starts telling these other girls, I had a brother who used to go by a nickname like that. And it turned out she was the youngest daughter of Martha, who Martha had, and she always left the kids with their dads. So I ended up meeting her, and she was, like, say, what I thought at the time was my half sister because I thought Martha was my mom. So I was so happy. I've got family now. I've got, blood family type thing. And she had a little boy, and I had a little boy, and her boy was about 6 months younger than mine, but he was bigger than mine. And but she was living with a guy who was her uncle, her dad's brother, and it later turned out he was the guy named by Wetmore in the affidavit to ICE that of being the person who took the other child away. Yeah,
Really?
yeah. But
Coincidence?
anyway, so I make I make the big mistake of, they wanted to get out of West Covina, and I invited them to come up to Fresno. Well, by the time I came down, I drove the truck up with all their worldly goods. We get up there, and they had an apartment waiting for a place waiting for them. And I never questioned how they got it or whether I just moved them in. But this guy and I, there was something about we didn't get along from some things, and I did remember him a bit when I was a child, and but not fondly remembered him, but I had like some memories of him. So anyway, what ended up happening was he and I were getting a lot of issues, and then there came a point where I was out of town, and he got to where he started choking her son because they all lived together, and took my wife and her, both of them, to pull him off the son. And then she was driving him somewhere, and he started punching her in the face, and she
Shit.
pulled over and jumped out and ran into this house. Well, unbeknownst to him, the house she ran into was the Marjorie Mason Center in Fresno, which was a battered women's center. And she reported that he was sitting in the car and he was armed. And the police came, and they found him with a sword cane, uh, a belt buckle knife, and a 25 automatic pistol in a wallet holster that was a fully loaded magazine with one in the chamber. So he gets arrested. I'm not in town at the time. And anyway, he goes to jail. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the OR system of release from jails,
No.
your own recognizance, where if you meet certain points because you've lived in an area so long and you've got people who will speak up for you, and you've got a job, and you've got all that kind of stuff, you can actually be released without actually having to post bail. You
So
know,
that's what happened to him.
yeah, but the problem was he hadn't lived there that long. He shouldn't have been able to make that. It turned out later that the probation officer who signed off on him was lived 3 doors down from Wetmore and was a good friend of Wetmore's. Uh, but
Connections.
the thing was that I had told my wife not to have anything to do with the guy. He's choking children and beating up women. Don't have anything to do with it. Well, unbeknownst to me at the time, he took asthma capsules. This is some kind of medication, and the girl, uh, who I thought was my half sister, gave his medicine to my wife to take to the jail to give him. Right now, most people probably understand that most jails and prisons will not let you walk in and see somebody and hand them a bunch of medication. It's not something that is seen as a good thing to do. But my wife tried it, and the jail said, "No, no, we'll give it if he needs something. We'll get it for him." So my wife took him home. So what had happened was my wife had told Wetmore that I had finally decided I was going to try to get a passport, come back for the UK, try to find family. And Wetmore came to realize that if I applied for a passport, I didn't have a birth certificate, and I wasn't the other child, that things could unravel for him.
Oh yeah.
So um, he also admitted the fact that he had been paying that man, the girl, and my wife to give him information about things I was doing to keep him in the know.
The
And he made a
hell.
comment statement that said it was amazing how just a little bit of cash will get people to betray those who they're closest to. You know,
Really?
and of course they would not have thought, oh, he's going to use this information for a bad reason. But anyway, so the guy gets released on OR. I happened to be uh, in Fresno, but I was out of town helping a friend do some construction work. He had a company, and I was pick up extra money doing construction
Hmm.
work and so with him. I was doing roofing for him. And anyway, he came over to my house, and my wife gave him a dinner, and then she gave him his medication, and then he collapsed. And I'd come home pretty late at night. It was probably about 10:30 or so, 11 maybe. My wife's car's not there. There's no lights on in the house. I come in the house, turn the light on, and I've got him laid out on my floor. And I quickly checked him, and he was dead. And I always had people say, "Well, how do you know he was dead?" Well, I was a corpsman. That's one of the things I learned to do is you learn to tell who's alive, who's dead when you triage them and stuff.
Hmm.
And I knew he was dead, but I couldn't find any wounds on him. So my thought was he'd had a heart attack. But sitting on the table was a 38 caliber revolver that he had, and he had a shoulder holster, and he had a boot knife on him. So I was thinking he was laying in wait for me to come home. You know, I don't know where my wife is. I don't know where my son is. And at that time, you didn't have cell phones. You only have home phones. And unless you know where somebody is, you can't just call people, you know. And my wife had a number of friends who I didn't know their numbers anyway. So the first thing I thought was, I ride with a motorcycle club. I have had physical altercations with this man that had been written up, though the police, by the time they got there, neither of us pressed charges. They didn't see anything except the aftermath. So back then, they didn't arrest you just because people said, oh, they fought, that type of thing. Um, but there was a background of this. And the thing was that I ride with a motorcycle club, I have a bike shop, and he's at my house. So in my mind at that time, there's no way I'm not getting arrested for this, regardless of anything else. But because I don't know where my wife and my son is, I don't want my wife and son coming back to this either. So I made the decision, good, bad, or indifferent, to load him in the back of my pickup truck and get the body away from my house. And so that's what I did. I brought out a sleeping bag, put him in. I was loading him in the back of the truck. My wife shows up. She comes running up. She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "I don't know what happened." Came. He had dinner. I said, "Why'd you let him in?" She goes, "Well, I was afraid. I didn't know what else to do." So I let him in. He had dinner. I gave him his medication. He was sitting there drinking his bottle of scotch, and he had the gun on the table. I was really scared. And then he just collapsed. And she goes, and I didn't know what to do. So I just grabbed the baby and I ran out. She went over to a friend's house, and she'd been waiting there for hours. And then apparently she called the neighbor and said, "Oh yeah, he came back." So then she came home, and so she helps me get him in the truck. We get in the truck and we start driving. And by this time, it's probably closer to after one, sometime maybe. Um, and then she starts harping at me. Well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to take him? Did you bring a shovel? Did you? Now, since I hadn't planned any of this to begin with, of course, I didn't have plans for any of this. So we're driving around. We're driving around in the rural part of Fresno, which is very agricultural. And she's getting to the point where she's telling me I'm stupid and you should have planned this better. You should have known what to do. You should have, and I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to resolve everything. And suddenly there's false dawn showing up. And you know what false dawn is, right? Just before real dawn, you start to see the sky lightening up.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So you
Yeah.
know dawn's not too far away. So we're driving down this road, and it's a regular road. Farm people use it all the time. And so we're right next to like a grape vineyard type thing. So I stop and I open up the thing and I drag him out and I put him sitting up against a post, right? And then I do probably the stupidest thing ever. I've had a number of people tell me, particularly some of the law enforcement people, is that he didn't have any identification on him, and I didn't want him not to be known. I didn't want him to become a John Doe. I wanted him to be found. And I wanted him to be cared for right. So I took out a piece of paper and pencil. I said, "In case of emergency, call this number," and I put it in his wallet. Right?
Damn.
You know,
Well,
yeah. I mean, it's people would say that was really stupid. At the time, it seemed like an all right thing to do because they'd call me and then I could identify the body, and then he'd get proper burial and all that stuff. So you
well, in
know,
in that mind state, you're not thinking, like, you're in a panic mode, like, you don't know what the hell's going on, so
I'm just trying. I'm just all I'm thinking about. I can't have him attached to my family in my house. End of story. So anyway, we drive back. We never talk about it. 3 days goes by, and of course, I hadn't realized. Of course, he'd just gotten out of jail. They'd done his fingerprints when he was in jail. So when they did
Mhm.
his fingerprints, they knew who he was. So they contacted the girl he'd lived with, who had a restraining order, which is why he couldn't go back to her place. So he'd been living down at the rescue mission in Fresno, and she goes, "Oh yeah, yeah." So then she tells them to call me, and then of course they see the note. They saw my number, and so they called me, and I did identify the body. So, and the thing was, they asked me. They said, "When was the last time you saw him alive?" I told them a few weeks ago, which was the truth. But they always went on the fact that I lied to him at that point because I'd seen him 3 days earlier when I was driving him around. But I always pointed out, you said, "When did you last see him alive?" Now, you can call that semantics or whatever. But if you ask me a question, I'm gonna give you the answer to the question. I'm not gonna, you know, divulge all this other stuff because it just didn't seem to be what you were interested in. So my involvement in the thing was I moved a body, which is kind of, uh, prejudicing justice or perverting justice or whatever. Uh, but it's a misdemeanor. I didn't do anything to the body except move it. And as they said, I lied to them. So in actuality, if I was being charged for what I did, I would have not done more than 6 months at the very, very most. And at this point, I had no criminal record. But what ended up happening was right after the girl had been notified that he was dead, he had been beating her up and taking her welfare money, her welfare checks every month, put them in his account. So she convinced my wife to drive over with her and take her to the bank so she could withdraw the money. And to do this, she had his checks because they lived together. So she forged 2 checks in his name to get her welfare money back out. This is days after he's dead, and everybody knows he's dead. Of course, the bank gets notified. If you die, the bank gets notified you're dead. So now they're getting checks that are written, like days after he's dead. They got checks.
Yeah.
So, but it took about almost 30 days before they actually did anything about it. And then what they did is they ended up arresting first the girl and my wife, and then I got arrested. Um,
So what'd you all
and
get charged for at that time?
initially it was charged for forgery and attempted forgery and accessory to forgery. And I got the accessory to forgery because when they asked him what happened to the money, they said, "Well, we put gas in his truck." Well, if a criminal action happens and there's monetary gain from it, you're an accessory. So the mere fact that the rule of thumb I had is you could borrow my vehicles, but put gas in them before you bring them back to me.
Right.
Well, they did, but they used the ill-gotten gains of this to put it, which now made me an accessory after the fact. But
Jesus.
made me an accessory, because that's the law. So anyway, uh, when they first did the autopsy, they came back and said he was strangled. That's what because he had petechia in his eyes, and that's a symbol of when you're being changed, your blood vessels break up in your eyes and stuff. So they said, oh, he was strangled. So at the time, since I'd had physical altercations with him, and I had uh, some fighting skills and stuff, it went on the assumption I choked him, killed him. And so initially they were charging me with that, with my wife being possibly an accessory. Um, but then comes the kicker is when they go and they try to prove who did the checks. Did my handwriting. My handwriting came back. I didn't have anything to do with the checks. Not writing them out, not endorsing them, nothing. My fingerprints weren't even on the checks, nothing. But it all came back to the girl that she had endorsed it and she had had forged them and stuff. So they went to her and said, "Look, you're facing 18 years in prison." And as soon as they said that, she went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" And her lawyers there, and they go, "Let's make a deal." And said, "Here's what happened. His wife killed the man with cyanide poison, and he helped move the body." So now everybody knew my role was simply moving the body. But what happened was those pills that she gave my wife to take to the jail, that my wife later gave him at our house, had been tainted with cyanide poison. Interesting enough, nobody knows what happened to the pills, right? But they never charged the sister, the girl, with the fact that she gave the pills. They went on the idea that my wife must have tainted them after she got them from the girl. But my wife had no real reason to kill him. But the thing was, what has been surmised over the years was that he called Wetmore while he was in the jail on those other charges and said, "If you don't get me out of here, I'll tell him what happened to the real John." You know, and then get Wetmore involved. And so Wetmore basically is believed that he called his friend, got his friend to get him out of jail, and before he got out of jail, though, had somehow tampered with these pills, gave them to the sister to give to my wife to take to the jail. So again, no harm, no foul. He would die in the jail. They would think something happened to him in the jail. La la la. Of course, it didn't work out that way. So suddenly now the sister, she's turning state's evidence against my wife for full immunity. Uh, and my wife gets charged with first degree murder with 2 counts of special circumstances. There's murder for robbery and murder by poison. So they charge my wife. They're able to pull together a jury, run her first jury trial in less than 4 months. And what ends up happening is they get a hung jury because one man cannot bring himself to sign off on having a woman put to death. Now, he said afterwards, when he was asked by the judge, he said, If they just wanted to put her in prison and let her die naturally in prison, I'm good with that. But just saying, the other 11 were all good putting her to death.
Really?
So
Wow.
so the next thing I know, they've had me in jail. They keep just changing my charges around. Conspiracy to this, accessory to that, and on, back and forth, back and forth. And they had put a bail on me. Initially, it was 50,000, which I could have made. But as soon as they knew I was about ready to make the 50,000, it jumped up to 500,000, which I couldn't make. And so then one day I get called out and I get taken to this interview room, and there sits the district attorney that is running the case. There's my wife's attorney. There's my attorney. I walk in, the DA says, "Here's the deal. Uh, I didn't get your wife on the last one, but I got that close. So I'm going to run it again, and I'm going to make sure I don't have any, you know, crying people on my thing. They're all going to be hardcore, justice people. Or I can offer you a deal because you're negligent as the head of the household. I will offer you a deal." He goes, "I'll offer you a deal to do 13 years, and I will drop all pending charges on your wife, and I'll return your son to her. And you got
Hmm.
15 minutes to make a decision."
What was your thoughts on that?
Well, as I'm trying to process it, then he comes up and he says, "You realize," he goes, "if you don't do this, how are you ever going to be able to tell your son that you had a chance to save his mother's life and you allowed her to be put to death?" Then he comes back and he goes, "Oh, now you got 10 minutes." And then he comes back and he says, "Who do you think could do time better in prison? You, the big bad biker, ex-military, or your wife who just is a part-time work cashier in a mini mart and a mother? Oh, you, by the way, you got 5 minutes." And he goes, "Are you really tough, or you just put that on?" He goes, "It's okay to wear the leather jacket, ride a Harley, and things like that." He goes, and you'd run through gunfire for men you don't know. But what would you do for your wife that you supposedly love? Oh, you got 90 seconds. And in 90 seconds, I walk out of this room and there's no deal. And I look at my attorney and she's going, and I look at my wife's attorney and he says, "Best deal we're going to get." He goes, "You got 30 seconds. What are you going to do?" "Oh, we're down to 15 seconds. Pretty soon we're going to do a 10 countdown." My attorney says, "You'll be out in time to see your son graduate high school." Because at the time I was told, the DA said, "I will not oppose any parole. And if you work and stay out of trouble and all that stuff, you'll be out in half, and because the way the sentence was, it was going to be a 27 sentence with 13 is what I would do." And so I said, "Yeah, I'll take that deal." And I got to see my wife the following day in visiting, where we were on glass on each side. And she had already been told by her lawyer I was going to take the deal. And then 2 weeks later, she got released. And after I had signed everything and was willing to take the deal, and 2 weeks after that, her and my son disappeared because she ran off with a brother of one of the girls she met in the county jail that she was sitting in there with for 6, 7 months. And they moved on up to Oregon, and I never heard from again. You know, uh,
Damn.
and
That is. Go ahead. Go
and
ahead,
then
Mark.
then of course I get to prison, and 4 years after I get in, the California legislature uh, does away with the good time work time for quote life prisoners, because when they gave me the 27, they put an L on the end of it without telling me. Uh, and the thing was that, which meant that I couldn't get the halftime because I couldn't earn good time work time. So that meant the earliest I could get out was 18 years, 6 months, because you have to do 2/3 of time to go to the first parole board. Initially, I was supposed to go to the parole board in '96, 13 years. And the the district attorney said he wouldn't oppose my parole. So I was looking at getting out in '96.
Yeah. Well,
And the
you
thing
know,
was, Webb was concerned I was going to get out in '96. And that's when he was really ill. And he died late '96. He had done this affidavit and all these documents. And in '97, they hit the INS thing, basically saying he's an illegal alien. He shouldn't be in this country anyway. No matter what I did, you should get rid of him. So the idea was even if I got out, I wouldn't be able to stay in the U.S. I'd have to come back over and start my life over in another country, you know, and stuff. And yeah, so I mean, but like I said, as I explained to people when I talked to them about things, I personally met uh, Ed Kemper, Charlie Manson, Tex Watson, Bobby Bousselet, Bruce Davis of the Manson family, Herbie Mullen, uh, you know, uh, uh, Richard Allen Davis, who was a polyclass thing that brought the three strikes in, uh, Ike Turner, Christian Brando, Charles Keating, Child Show Kidnappers, Cameron Hooker, the guy who kept the girl in the box under the bed. All these really nice people. I met all these people. So and survived all that. And like I said, so but see, one of the things with me was when I got in prison, I had never been a criminal before prison. I didn't see myself as a criminal in prison. I didn't expect to be a criminal when I got out. And I honestly believed I would get out. I didn't expect it was going to take as long as it did, but I always believed I was going to get out. And I'd always had the dream of getting back to the Isle of Man at some point because that was where I was born, and I wanted to know the place. Um, so,
Well, to
uh,
give people a little background too, it's like you expected to get out way earlier, but you ended up getting 36 years total.
well, 34 and a half
34.
years is what I served.
Yeah.
But the thing was like, when I was in prison, like you're saying about helping people, like I said, because I wasn't afraid of people in general and stuff like that. Uh, I tended to stand up in situations where other people would. And there were times when I saw young guys coming in that were vulnerable. And I knew that if somebody didn't speak up for them, their situation was going to be a lot worse. It's one of the things I used to tell people, guys, when I was new guys I meet. I said, first thing, if somebody comes up to you and tries to get you to hang out with them and stuff, the first question you should ask them is, "What are you going to do to help me get out of prison?"
Nothing.
And if you ask a guy that, most of the time they go, "Huh? What?" Because I told them, I said, if they're not trying to help you get out, they're trying to help you stay in. So that puts them
Mhm.
on a whole different page. And I told them, even if the guy could do nothing more but encourage you every day to do the right thing, to be positive things, that's enough because that's helping you try to get out. And then the other thing I used to tell people about gangs, what I've learned was the gangs don't want really smart people coming in, particularly gang leaders don't want smart people because they want to be the smartest person in the group because that's why they're the leader. They want big muscle guys around them to be intimidating, but they want themselves to be the person everybody looks to for the wisdom and knowledge and all that. And so I used to tell guys, if you don't want to be a target for a lot of gangs, said start reading. And I said, don't read comic books and that. Start actually reading books on geography and physics and take vocational courses, educate yourself. If you don't have a high school diploma, work on it, all this stuff. Because the more you're doing that, the less you're seen as a mindless drone that they can just use to go do stupid stuff and pick up time for, and stuff. Because prison is a minefield in a lot of ways. I'm sure you've seen probably enough shows and heard enough things like people will talk about snitching, you know, that it's a horrible thing to be a rat. Okay. But even that has its gray areas. Because the idea was that if you and I were in prison together and we casually knew each other, and I hear somebody over here say that they're going to have you stabbed. Now I don't really know these guys, but I know you. So I come over and I go, hey, check this out. Uh, you might want to watch your back. These guys are going to stab you. Well, now, to their mind, I just ratted them out. To your mind, I just did you a solid. because I gave you the heads up to now be prepared.
Right.
So the idea for me was ratting somebody out was if you went and told the officers about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a little group, the idea is you watch each other's back, you help each other out, you do the. So there's like little things like that. And then the other thing that was always funny to me is that we're sitting at a table in the chow hall, and you don't get to sit by necessarily the race. You sit by who sits down with you in most places. So we're sitting there, and there is a black guy sitting across from us. Now, I don't like my cake. He doesn't like his broccoli. So I tell him, I'll give you my cake for your broccoli. Well, that's a big taboo. Oh, no, no, you can't take food off another race's plate. Right. Now, the funny enough is that the men serving the food on the back line are of all different races. So some other races are putting the food on your plate. And the other thing was the same guys who are making these rules about you can't do this, you can't do that. The white guys in particular are the same guys that are using the drugs that came out of some black or Hispanic man's butt.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So for
No,
me, it's like,
it
where's the
don't make sense.
where's the sense of this matter?
There's
And
no
I had
logic in it.
friends of all different races because I treated everybody with respect and only
Yeah.
wanted my respect back. And so, um, funny enough, for me, there were times when if things kind of got a little hinky, people knew I could look up and I'd suddenly have some blacks or Hispanics or Native Americans or Asians or even Pacific Islanders. Even though my first issue with Pacific Islanders was I had a guy named Pineapple, and I write about it in my book. He was half Maori, half Samoan. He was like 5'10" with a 60-inch chest and 26-inch biceps. And I just finally got into the weightlifting club called the 300-pound club. And they give you a card and they ask you what do you identify as. And of course, back then you were identified by a race, not by a gender type thing. So I told them an island. Well, in the California prison system, technically the only islanders are Pacific Islanders. Hawaiians, Maoris, New Zealander, Australia. I mean, Samoans, things like that. And so the guy came up to me in the gym one day, and I was working out with this one black guy I worked out with regularly, and he tells me, "Don't call yourself an islander." He goes, "If you ever call yourself an islander, I'm going to have to bust you up." And I looked at him. I said, "Look, I come from a place called the Isle of Man. How much more of an islander can I be?" He said, "Well, just don't do it." So I do what I do, which other people wouldn't. I punch him. I hit him in the right side of his jaw, and I break the jaw at the top, the hinge. But I shatter the bone in my wrist, and I shatter the bone in my wrist here, and I break all the knuckles. And so he grabs me, picks me up, throws me up to where I hit the little ceiling in this little alcove I'm in, picks me up, bounces me off the wall, picks me up, throws me on the floor. And he starts to walk away, and he's with 3 or 4 other, Pacific Islanders. And I drag myself up to my knees and get up to my feet, and I said, "Hey, I'm not done with you yet." He turns around and walks back, and when he does, I hit him with the right hand, and I shatter the knuckles in my right hand here. Yeah, break 2 big knuckles on both hands,
Gee.
and I break his jaw, the hinge here, and to chin. So he's got a fully broken jaw now in 3 places. And again, he throws me all over the place, and again, I start to try to get up, and I got no wind in me. My chest, I've been knocked all out of the wind out of me. I'm bruised, I'm battered. I'm trying to get up, and he's yelling, "Stay down, stay down." You know, through a draw. You're trying to understand
Mm.
what he's saying, but I could get what he was trying to say. So he goes out and he heads to the infirmary. Well, I worked in the infirmary at this time, upstairs, helping the nurse take care of patients and do bandage changes and stuff. And so I'm getting up off the floor. The black guy walked over and said, "Damn." He goes, "I wish you told me you were going to do that." He goes, "I could have sold tickets because that was about the stupidest thing I've ever seen."
Jeez, man. Well,
By the time I get to, huh?
I was gonna say, I do gotta run, man. I gotta go out to another town, and we're at that
That, that,
90-minute mark. I know that we can continue to go and keep going with this, and maybe
yeah,
we'll do a part 2 because we can go into more depth about prison and what it did to you and, just
yeah.
the effects that it had, and then you getting out and I mean, not necessarily changing your life, but, what you did after you got out of prison and stuff like
Well,
that, but you did help
well,
people out.
2 years ago, on my 68th birthday, the highest court in the Isle of Man ordered my
Yeah.
birth to be registered, and they had me go over so it could be registered on my actual 68th birthday.
Oh,
So
really?
I have my birth certificate from the Isle.
Oh,
You know,
good. There you go.
I
That's
mean,
good. You finally
this is
got
what I'm
it.
saying. There were a lot of naysayers going, "No, no, you're not from there. You're not from there." So
But you
I've
got it.
got 3 countries that say I am, and I got a court that ordered the highest court in the land over there. The highest judge of the land had me give me my birth certificate.
Well, there you go. There's the proof,
I've been,
man.
I've been back 9 times. I've been back to my Isle 9 times, but it's been
Yeah.
great talking to you. Yeah, contact me
Yeah.
again. We'll see about you know doing whatever you want to do.
Yeah, no, I hope everyone enjoys it. We went into a lot of depth about his background and stuff before prison and stuff, and, we can always do a part 2 if everyone likes this, give us a comment, let us know what you think about Jamie's story, but there's a lot of in-depth stuff that went on that went into him going in prison. A lot of crazy stories, I'll tell you that, from past
Like I
interviews
said,
I've heard.
I rode with a motorcycle club as well, so that was like I said a part of the thing there. Um, but if you could mention my 2 books, I'd
Yeah,
appreciate that.
go ahead if you wanna mention
Okay.
'em, I could put them in the description too.
Okay.
What are the
The
names of
first,
them?
well, the first one's called 34 Years in Hell, and it was published in '99, but it's still available. The other one's called Behind the Granite Walls, and that was published 2 years ago. Um, but they're available. Like say, you can get them on Amazon and other book sites and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, but they're published by Mirror Books over here in the UK and
Yeah.
stuff. And at
Okay.
this present time, there is discussions by a number of people to turn my story either into uh, a series or even possibly a film.
Yeah.
So
I could see that. There's so much
the biggest
content
thing
to
right
be.
now is getting a script written is really where the problem is right now. Is working
Yeah,
on getting someone to get the script written. And I don't know
yeah.
why I'm in the dark again. But
I don't know why the hell it kept doing that, man. I'd have no clue, man. I mean, if we
well,
do it into
hopefully
part 2.
I work that out next time. I
Yeah,
appreciate
you
it. Have a
yeah.
good day.
You too, Jamie. Thank you.
Jamie has lived a wild life. He has spent over 34 years of his life in prison. He still states that he did not commit this murder after he was convicted. Jamie said while he was in prison, he did the best that he could while he was in prison to help people out. He claimed that he wanted to do his time and get out. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview with Jamie. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed today's interview. Hit the notification button if you want to get notified when the next podcast drops. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to get more content from me. At the end of this video, a playlist will pop up of all the other Invest in Yourself podcast episodes I've done in the past. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one.